Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishnas in Britain. This is episode number 72. The Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast is brought to you by the Hare Krishna Project, which is a national initiative in the UK that seeks to try and share Krishna consciousness with a new audience. We organize events, we distribute books, and we produce this podcast. And thank you to everyone who has been tuning in over the last 72 episodes. As you know, many of you know, this was only meant to be like a 10 episode type thing, and we're now at episode 72. And we're grateful to our guests and to all the viewers and listeners from now around the world that want to tune in every week to hear what our guest, not me, to hear what our guest has to say. And I'm hugely delighted and honored to welcome our 72nd guest. Please welcome Kesava Krsna Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Greetings.
It's great to have you with us on this week's edition of the podcast. So we're going to kick off. I'm going to ask you the same question I ask every guest every week. Tell us a bit about you and where you're from.
My name is already known by now. I'm originally from the UK. Gloucester is my hometown, and yes, I think that's the short answer to that.
I love the short answer. So I'm from Bath, which is I think probably hour down the road from Gloucester.
Ah, okay. Some Roman links there to both places.
Yes.
Historical.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So tell us a bit about how you met the devotees. How did you discover Krishna consciousness?
I was a 17-year-old. By that time, I already saw individuals in the shopping mall who were approaching people with LPs, long playing records, as they had at that time. This is 1977, so I'm giving away my age now. And I would avoid them as far as possible. One fateful day, I remember it was a winter's day, and overcast, damp, and because of these people, I would generally walk to the side of the shopping mall to keep out of reach. Somehow or other, one of them caught me, approached me, and gave me a small book, spoke a few words to me. I guess he must have thought I was a little interested because he took the small book from my hand and placed a Bhagavad Gita in my hand, asked me for a donation. I gave a little change, and he asked me for my name and address, which I scribbled on a piece of paper. But a few words I do remember what he said. As I was quickly browsing through the Bhagavad Gita, he said, all these people out here, they're just barking at you like cats and dogs. So that struck me. Heavy thing to say, but that's while I was speaking at the Bhagavad Gita. And that was it. I walked away and took the Bhagavad Gita home, started reading it, and something struck because just by reading those words, by the way, this Bhagavad Gita was it had a blue purple cover. So it wasn't the usual Gita version that we know of today. And something clicked within. It told me to say that, this is what I want to do. This is it. This is the answer. I would leave my Bhagavad Gita in my bedroom, and I'd go out and come back, and I would notice that my Gita would be moved to another place in the bedroom. So I knew that someone else was looking at it or reading it, or I wasn't quite sure because we didn't speak about the Bhagavad Gita. Eventually, after I joined the movement full time in 1980, age 19, I was still 19 at the time. 2 months after that, my brother joined. So I realized that it was him who was reading, unbeknown to me. So there you are.
Wow, I've got loads of questions already. I'm kind of fascinated to hear about. So, I mean, my first question to follow up is, did you and your brother have a particularly religious or spiritual upbringing?
We were raised Anglican, not strict at all. We didn't even go to church on Sundays regularly. From school, primary school, we would do school plays and so forth, and so the vicar, Reverend Florian, he would come and watch our plays, and if we joined the school choir, we'd go and do a function at the church, perhaps on Christmas. But that was as far as it went. Nothing overtly religious or anything like that. However, I was always hanging around with a solid group of friends, 5 of us. We were a very sporty type. We played squash. We'd socialize to go to nightclubs and so forth. There was some kind of yearning inside me. Sometimes I would just raise a philosophical point, and I knew that my other friends weren't interested. So in that sense, I was lonely because I did want to know more. At the same time, all this socializing and did seem rather shallow. So yes, so there is something there, and the Bhagavad Gita reignited that curiosity, so to speak, or perhaps something from somewhere.
I was going to say, you mentioned about kind of being raised in Anglican. I guess it's kind of cultural in the UK, isn't it? In a lot of Western countries, we are kind of culturally Christian. We observe the festivals of Christmas and Easter often through chocolate and alcohol, and you kind of do Christian things. My family are not religious in any way, but I would probably label them as cultural Christians, as am I. Because the calendar in the UK and other Western countries is shaped around the Christian calendar in terms of when you take time off work, when the bank holidays are, and kind of things like that. Okay, so I just to say to all the viewers and listeners at home, what the type of guest I love on this podcast is a guest that I know very little about, so I can ask questions, and I'm really surprised by the answer. And I really don't know much about Kesava Krsna Prabhu, so I didn't know that his brother also joined around the same time as him. So I've got all these questions now. I saw. So you, I think you served as a bramacari for some time. Tell us a bit about that. Where were you living? Which temple were you connected with?
I joined full-time. Well, first of all, I went through the process. In fact, it's interesting. I took a trip to London. I made an announcement to the family. I said that I'm going to become a monk, and there was silence in the family. My mum thought, well, it's another phase. We'll see how long you last. So I took a lone train journey to London. But before that, I made a call, and there was a number in. Oh yes, I received a Back to Godhead magazine. There was a response to that little name and address I gave on that scribbled piece of paper. So in that Back to Godhead, I got the contact number for Bhaktivedanta Manor, and I called, and it was the guest master. I asked, is it all right for me to come? He said yes. So I took the train journey, went to Soho Street first of all, stayed there for a couple of days. There was another guest that stayed there. Somehow, I don't know what happened, if it was planned or choreographed, or the moment I entered the Soho Street restaurant entrance on the ground floor, another chap also entered, and a lady devotee there, she said, no, you can't come in. Can you imagine your first ever trip to a Hare Krishna temple and you're told you can't come in? I asked her why. Well, you're with that guy there, I said, I had to plead my innocence. I've never met this guy before. Anyway, it was sorted out eventually. So I ended up on the guest program upstairs, and this stranger also shared the room as well. After about a day or two, I realized that my wallet with all my money, documents, and so on went missing. So I guess that there was some ulterior motive in that stranger coming. And after a couple of days, Rohinanandan Prabhu, he seemed to have a link between Soho Street and the manor. And I went for a ride with him in his little Mini. And sat next to me was the now late but famous at that time, Polystyrene. So she was a co-passenger with me in the back of the Mini. So we took the drive to Bhaktivedanta Manor, and I stayed on the program there for a few days. After that, I traveled to Chaitanya College. So that's where I joined full-time. Chaitanya College in Worcester. I joined on the Bhakti course, very intense Bhakti course training for 3 months. After I graduated, well, just to let you know, Vipamukya, the former Vipamukya Swami, he was our Bhakti leader. Kesava Prabhu was a co-leader. There was another Prabhupada disciple, Vasugos Prabhu, or I think I need to be corrected on that. he was a co-bhakti leader, and there was a Vyasa Puja Das. He was our Harinam leader. After graduating from the Bhakti course, we were primed to do book distribution. So my first party leader on traveling Sankirtan, now as a bramacari, was Kalyapani Prabhu. And there we traveled South Wales, Cardiff, Newport, Swansea, all those places, and the towns and valleys in between. And after several weeks of that, we did Southwest England. It was at that time that this party, Kalyapani's party, we had the world's first traveling temple. It was a very large, those juggernaut lorries, but converted into a beautiful temple on the inside, replete with a kitchen, shower facility. Well, actually, not really shower facility because we took bucket baths outside, but yeah. So it was exciting, very intense traveling Sankirtan. You can imagine living in vans, as simple as one can think of. I don't know how I managed it. When I think back on those days now, I shudder to think, I could do those things. I'm not sure if I could survive at the moment, but yeah. So that's how we spent our brahmachari days doing book distribution.
Wow. And so your brother also became one question I have to ask. So what did your parents or your mother think of both her sons had become Hare Krishna monks, not just one but two? What was her reaction or response to that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that point. Well, just my being part of the temple alone, that was enough to upset my parents greatly. While I was on the Bhakti course, my mum would call me, highly emotional. Automatically, it's like two worlds meeting at the same time. Here I am trying to get into this routine of, being a fired up brahmachari, living an ashram life, and this sense of renunciation or detachment was very strong in those days, perhaps overemphasized. So this mindset, meeting with a highly emotional mother, it's quite a clash, and I would be emotionally affected. So yeah, she would say, come home, you can do this at home, can't you? But of course, in those days, it was thought that one could only practice Krishna consciousness by being a full-time member in the temple. And that's what we did. There was no idea of practicing at home like we do today. So after the 2 months, my brother joined. So doubly, there were just two sons. We had a sister, but two brothers. So you can imagine it changed everything in the family. While I was on the Bhakti course, Vipamukya Prabhu, he saw my distress, as it were, So he drove me home back to Gloucester to visit my parents, and he showed a new video or a new movie that came out at that time called the Hare Krishna World. So he set up the projector and then showed the movie. But my parents, they weren't interested in all that. They didn't want philosophy. They just wanted me home. And even my dad said, because not very long before I joined, I bought, he liked a certain type of music, and so do I. Orchestral music. I bought a single. It was by Ennio Morricone. He was generally like a film, movie songwriter or music writer, composer. And the song was called Once Upon a Time in the West. It's a very haunting music, droning cellos and a haunting female voice. And so my dad would say, please come home. Every time I play this record, it just reminds me of you. Come home, stay home. And there was this other class now, Vipmuka Swami, me in between, and my parents. And so I put on a brave face, and I told them that I'll be okay, and I'm happy at what I'm doing. And, so I left it that. Of course, internally, I was highly emotional, but I held it back. On the way back to the temple with Vipmuka Swami, back to Worcester, Chaitanya College, I never had this experience before. I just broke down. I just cried spontaneously. I didn't want to cry at home. I cried on the way to Chaitanya College. And Vipmuka Swami didn't quite know how to deal with it. All he could say was, "Oh, this is just what Arjuna went through, before Bhagavad Gita was spoken." That's all he could say, really. So yes, so it was intense. Had today's spirit of things, being able to practice Krishna consciousness at home was available then in those days, it didn't have to come to that. So yeah.
So I feel like you and I could talk forever, and we could chat about the last 46 years or the last 43 years of your time in Krishna consciousness. But in a moment, we're going to come on talking a bit about ISKCON Resolve, which is our main topic of discussion for today. But before I get to that, I'm still keen to know about your brother. Is your brother still practicing Krishna consciousness like you? Is he still around? That kind of thing.
Very much so. He's also in South Africa, where I am now, in the same city, in another suburb. Yes, he has 3 sons. He also writes on social media. So yeah, he went through the same bramacari process as I did. He was in another Sankirtan, traveling Sankirtan party, but still very much active. Yes.
What's your brother's name?
Paravidya.
Paravidya. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I feel like I could ask so many questions, but we're talking about one particular thing today. So you're now in South Africa. I'm glad you've mentioned that. because I've known for some time you're in South Africa because I see it on your social media, but I've detected from your accent today that you're originally from Britain, and it turns out not too far away from where I'm from as well. You've been around the Hare Krishna movement for a long time, 43, 46 years. And for a period of time, you were part of a project initiative, a department called ISKCON Resolve. So let's just start from the basics. Tell us, what is ISKCON Resolve and what does it do?
The project was intended to address issues that arise within ISKCON, in the devotee community. In fact, it was a first for we could say a religious organization, if you want to, for the sake of argument. Scholars, university scholars were very interested. They were watching. So Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, he was instrumental in beginning this project, and he was able to train practitioners, or you could say conflict resolutioners, or from different parts of the world, and they are there in one sense like troubleshooters, or it's a facility to try to, whenever disputes arose between devotees, with certain processes, not haphazardly, to arrive at win-win situations, to ensure that both parties get something out of a dispute and that they walk away either satisfied or reasonably satisfied, depending on the level of emotion involved and so on. Yeah.
And in which year was ISKCON Resolve established?
If I'm correct in saying, I can't say precisely which year, although I did know, but at beginning of around 2002. Anyway, first decade of the new millennium. Yeah.
So maybe about 20 years or so. Maybe about 20 years it's been
thereabouts.
Yeah, in existence. And your involvement, you were you asked to get involved because you have a background in conflict resolution, or did you put your hand up as a keen volunteer? What was your involvement with it?
Well, there was one devotee who was nominated by the GBC here in South Africa, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu. So he was tasked with heading up this department here. But at the same time, looking for members to add on who could represent various parts of South Africa. So in that respect, I was approached by Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, would you like to do this service? See, at that time, I was involved in management, in directorship at a brand new temple that started in Sandton in Johannesburg, a very affluent area. And, I was good friends with the temple president there. I was happy with that service, pioneering, with a new project and so forth. So Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, another good friend, he asked me, and for some reason that service, wanting to help, to be of help, appealed to me more than this service. I was caught again in between two very good friends, the temple president and Bhaktivedanta Prabhu. I settled on opting for this service, but then I realized that I could do this service, but also I could keep this managerial service as long as I remain neutral in my ISKCON Resolve service. In other words, we were allowed to wear two hats, but that's not very common. But that's how it went. Yeah.
So I guess ISKCON Resolve has kind of acted as a kind of a referee body. Somebody, let's say somebody in France has an issue with another devotee or with a temple, a management structure or a temple president, or even a guru or a sannyasi, and they will contact ISKCON Resolve, explain the issue, and then ISKCON Resolve would look into it and try and resolve it, I guess.
Certainly, yes. You didn't mention the GBC.
Oh, GBC.
So even the GBC, yes. At all levels, ISKCON Resolve is available. There are different levels of conflict resolution. There's the initial discussion between affected parties. We try to get the parties together if they're willing to talk. That's a good start to have that understanding. It's voluntary. Although the facility is there, we're not, I mentioned troubleshooters earlier. It's not that we are enforcers or a police force. We can't simply go up to affected parties and say, now come on, you have to get together and talk. No, it's purely voluntarily. Only if participants are willing, then we can get something going. So that's why the success rate for ISKCON Resolve is not always 100%, because a good number of people are not willing to participate. So
yeah, I was thinking that in order for ISKCON Resolve to work, both or multiple parties have to want to be involved. And obviously it's completely voluntary. I say this to devotees regularly, we are, well, not all of us, some people are paid, but most of us are not paid. We're all volunteers in the Hare Krishna movement. And so you can't force people to do anything they don't want to do. We all have the free will and the choice to, within reason, do what we want.
And that's how it should be at all levels, again, in all aspects of our devotee community.
So before I get on to asking about why you're not involved anymore, I'm keen to know more about how many referrals per year or per month did ISKCON Resolve have?
It's interesting because this type of service meant that whenever we dealt with issues between parties, matters were kept confidential. And because of that confidentiality, records were not kept. So in that sense, there were no real statistics on, numbers of cases, and because after a case, it depends. Now, I was mentioning earlier about the different levels of processes in ISKCON Resolve. So one level is called mediation. So that's, the most serious part, but highly useful. At the end of mediation, there's a signing of an agreement between the parties. And that agreement may last for 6 months, a year, whatever the case may be. So for that duration, a record would be kept, for understandable reasons. But other than that, apart from the scholarly interests, we may mention cases or case studies without, implicating anybody. No names are mentioned at all. So, but even then, no hard numbers of cases and so on. But individually, it varies. We had a team of 4 to 5 ISKCON Resolve members in South Africa, representing different areas, regions, and some individuals, this voluntary nature, devotees had a choice. They could see a list of ISKCON Resolve members there. So they had a choice. If they felt more confident in some individuals, they could approach that person to help. Whereas another person, they may feel more intimidated, and so there was choice in that regard as well. So some individuals were busier than others. And in my particular case, it comes and goes. On some days, I could be working on 2 to 3 cases ongoing at the same time. At other times, there may be just one case and it may be prolonged. Sometimes there are quiet spells. No news is good news, so that's good. But all the while, as a team, we had monthly or regular meetings to discuss our cases, between our ISKCON Resolve members. And often Raj Bihari would join us as well. So it was nicely organized, and we kept in touch.
And how, my next question is around how receptive were the ISKCON leadership to the activities of ISKCON Resolve? So when I say ISKCON leadership, I mean all levels, temple presidents, GBC members, gurus. When a complaint came in or an issue came in, how receptive were they to ISKCON Resolve investigating things?
Yeah. To begin with, ISKCON Resolve was highly misunderstood. It was an unknown entity. So initially, management, were reluctant, or they just didn't know, what role ISKCON Resolve had. And likewise, from, turn the argument around, sometimes ISKCON Resolve, we didn't know sometimes where ISKCON management, was supposed to function, what the limits were. In other words, sometimes there were gray areas. And I do remember in one or two cases, there were misunderstandings and correspondence, between myself and the GBC, local GBC, just to try and iron things out. But then after this initial misunderstanding, it's settled somewhat. So it's more like everything is left to management. But if management is unable to solve a problem or resolve a problem, then who are you going to call? So that's where ISKCON Resolve comes in. So that seems to be the pattern. So on any level of management, ISKCON Resolve, if they cannot sort out things themselves.
Okay, that was useful because you told me things that I didn't know. I actually didn't know that ISKCON Resolve had been around that long. I thought it was more of a recent invention or creation. So tell us a bit now. So you're not involved anymore yourself. Tell us a bit about, and I think you resigned this year. I think I saw that online this year. So tell us a bit about why you resigned. What was the cause of your kind of resignation from that body?
Yeah. Thank you. See, by this time, for some years that I've been writing articles, I wrote for Dandavats, and there's a usual theme to what I write. It's usually in defense of devotees who have been wronged or hurt, within ISKCON. And I think about 5-6 years ago now, I came onto Facebook to continue this with shorter posts and observations. So I was doing this even while I was getting involved in management. But on the level of management, again, I tried to, it was very difficult, but, to have management that is able to understand devotees on the ground, so to speak, caring management, caring corporatism. There are many different ways to put it. So ISKCON Resolve was also a way, in a sense, to do that. It was like if a devotee came to us to make a complaint, we felt a sort of obligation to try to help that individual. It's like being a lawyer of that individual. But at the same time, one cannot side with one person or another. Neutrality is a highly essential part of ISKCON Resolve. We're not supposed to take sides with anyone. So it's not so easy. So anyway, in practice, we remain, or we retain our neutrality, impartiality. But in my social media posts, I would, I would just make observations and write things that devotees know that, these are things which are not normally spoken about within ISKCON, taboo topics and so on. I knew I was taking a risk because by doing this, by writing these posts, on one hand, these are my private thoughts I'm sharing with the audience and readers. On the other hand, I'm supposed to be, remaining neutral and, I'm not supposed to be saying these things if I'm involved in management and so on. So yes, I was taking a risk, but it went on for, 3, 4, 5 years. I was able to do that. So it came to a head, we could say, more recently. I was involved in, this is my last case. I was representing 2 directors of a temple, and so on their behalf, I would present options to management to say that surely there's a better way of dealing with this. The part of ISKCON Resolve is presenting options. We don't actually resolve issues. We help people to resolve their own issues by presenting options. So, so when I presented these options to national management, including the GBC, it was thought that put 2 and 2 together, my social media posts and these options. So someone somewhere thought that I was not being impartial. I was more partial in favor of the directors. It went to Bihari, and Bihari wanted to speak to me. We had a couple of meetings, and I knew the writing was on the wall, so to speak. So rather than it come to the point of being asked not to do the service anymore, I just voluntarily resigned. So that's the reason.
Did you feel that, I was about to use the word enjoy, which we don't often use much in the Krishna way. We're not enjoying life, but did you feel that your time with ISKCON Resolve was beneficial? Did you enjoy the service? Did you like the service? Did you feel like you were making a difference and it was having a positive impact on people's lives?
Very much so. As I indicated earlier, depending on the level of receptivity of the participants, those who voluntarily wanted to resolve issues, the best outcomes would come from that. And yes, there were some successful cases, especially after mediation, involving management and aggrieved devotees. Some cases were, I should mention, when getting involved in these cases, we have to transmit the feelings of one party with another party. We have to be an in-between them. We have to communicate between both parties. And that can be very intense. The most intense case I had, for example, was, between 2 devotees who were the best friends. They went to primary school together, high school, and they somehow both joined ISKCON at the same time. So they're lifelong buddies. Some financial transaction happened between them, and it soured things between them so much that they're no longer on talking terms. So to be in between those 2 with such strong feelings towards each other, it's so intense. And after the session, sometimes I just have to withdraw and just do some exercise or some deep breathing, or just something to let off the negativity. So it can be very intense, yeah. But the outcomes enjoyable, but it was a sense of duty. So duty, whether the results are good or bad, we tried our best. So duty, there was always satisfaction in doing the service. I would say more satisfaction than enjoyable. Yeah.
Do you feel and think that now in 2023 there is, I wouldn't ask, is there a need for ISKCON Resolve, but is ISKCON Resolve, the body that it once was? Is it as respected as it once was? And is it more, I've never had any experience with ISKCON Resolve. The only things I've heard about ISKCON Resolve, I mean, I'm in the UK, are negative things based on things not being resolved. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be because the devotees don't want to resolve things, or it's just too big for a voluntary body to resolve. So I've only heard, unfortunately, negative things about it. I'm sure there are lots of positive things as well. But do you feel that there is still... So my question is there still a need for, or is it still well received within ISKCON? Is it still well received within ISKCON like it used to be?
I mentioned about these weekly, well, not weekly, but regular meetings between ourselves that we had. And excuse me. I don't know if Raja Bihari, he's very busy, so he may not recall, but in 2 or 3 of these meetings, I would mention to the team with Raja Bihari, I would say that surely if this team ISKCON Resolve is here to help resolve issues within ISKCON, then surely there must be some scope for getting involved in the real big issues of ISKCON. For example, the book changes, female Dixie Gurus, the potential divide between the Greater Indian Yatra and the GBC, like that. So in that sense, you touched on an important topic, because from my experience, I do feel that the size or the gravity of some of these larger issues are beyond the scope of ISKCON Resolve as it currently is. There are some experienced practitioners there, competent as well. But at the same time, is there a willingness on the part of the GBT, for example, or even the Indian Yatra, to be willing to engage on that level? So again, willingness comes into play. So I have doubts that ISKCON Resolve is the answer to all questions, of that nature in ISKCON. Acceptability within ISKCON, it's still growing. New ISKCON Resolve members have recently been made in India, some from China, Russia. So it's growing in that sense. So the responsibility is for Raj Bihari to keep in touch with them, to have ongoing training with them, and to ensure that these very important values of impartiality and neutrality are upheld. Because without that, yeah, it will be compromised, and therefore we will see mixed results or hear of mixed results that you have just mentioned.
So a lot of your I guess kind of slightly changing the topic of conversation now, a lot of your social media posts, which I follow, are very much about, as you've mentioned, they're about kind of standing up for the underdog, supporting those that have felt or experienced a sense of injustice in ISKCON, and really being a voice for people who are voiceless in the Hare Krishna movement. And my question from that is, what does ISKCON need to do to create an environment where people feel more included, or there's a more of a feeling of inclusivity? So in another kind of way of asking, how can ISKCON become more inclusive?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, that question should be put to the GBC and higher management. In general terms, devotees on the ground know that there is a level of inaccessibility to higher management. So we sort of have a divide, a them and us divide. I saw an interesting statistic yesterday, not official, a rough estimate. It said that in a normal corporate entity, top executives may see 4% of what is actually going on in the entire, although they have an overall working knowledge of what's going on, but in real terms, hands-on and so on, they may have 4% perception of what's going on in the entire organization. Middle management may have something like 20%. I'm not sure. I stand to be corrected, but it's a comparatively low figure. Whereas people on the ground, they have something like 70% or something like that. In other words, people on the ground tend to be aware of what's going on in the organization. Same applies to ISKCON. Devotees on the ground are aware. They talk. But how they talk, they don't talk openly. They'll talk in whispers, in their own families, among their own friends, because they know that they simply can't say certain things in front of leaders and managers. So there had to be a, this cliche word, disconnect, I think is useful here. So the disconnect between devotees on the ground and management is quite prevalent. Somehow we need this is where ISKCON Resolve could be useful. But as I see it, ISKCON Resolve can only do so much because they get win-win situations or try for win-win situations. here we're talking about something bigger, and it requires input and actual interaction between management and devotees on the ground, and really that's how it should be. The dynamics are quite different. For example, if you may, in 1982, my then guru at that time, Zonalachaya Jayatata Das, he spent time with Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So at some point, Jayatata Das, we went over to Srila Sridhar Maharaj's mat, my brother and I, and he introduced us to Srila Sridhar Maharaj. There were other godbrothers and sisters there as well. So we spent time at the mat, and I could notice the difference in the pace of life in the mat. Things were quite different. Whereas in ISKCON, everything was up tempo. You got to keep your mind occupied, and everything is gung ho. But in the mat there, it was, a relatively easy pace. And when it came to prasadam time, it was always the most senior Vaishnavas who served the prasad. So we sit down in rows, and so the eventual successor of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Srila Sundar Govinda Maharaj, he would serve the prasad. So, that's Vaishnava culture. There's a sense of pride. There's a story where Srila Prabhupada went to visit one king in India, and he was the one who wanted to serve Srila Prabhupada and his guests. No, the other guests, the king himself took pride in serving, Srila Prabhupada and the guests. So there's that sense of pride in Vedic tradition. So again, we don't quite have that dynamic in ISKCON. There's more like one is more deserving the higher you go up in the corporate ladder, so to speak. So you get served more there rather than the other way around. Yeah. So there is a disparity. Definitely some mechanism to bridge the gap. And the experience from seeing how they do things in another mat, I'm sure we can draw upon that. It would be helpful.
I'm certainly all in favor of that in terms of how can devotees from different mats learn from each other, and what are the other side doing, not in a competitive way or wanting to steal ideas, but what works as best practice. What's a kind of more positive thing. I mean, I could give a number of examples of that, but I like that approach. How we're all really part of Lord Chaitanya's family, or we should be all part of Lord Chaitanya's one family. There's diversity within the family, as there is any family. I mean, I'm one of 4 brothers, and we're all very different, but we're still brothers. And so ultimately, I like this idea of trying to learn from one another. And we're part of this kind of, we should be having this outward approach to kind of preaching and trying to, not the word, I'm not going to use the word convert, but share Krishna consciousness with the general public. Did you then, just out of interest, did you spend time yourself with the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat in the 80s?
No, I was always an ISKCON member. It so happened that around this time in 1982, it's, we could say that we're veering off topic here, but Officially, Jayatita was the first Yonadacharya to, to use the coin Srila Prabhupada's phrase loop. But in doing that, he took a large number of disciples with him. You see, this was during the Mayapur Gopinim festivities in 1982. That's the whole discussion in itself. I don't know. I'm not sure how much you want to discuss.
We can maybe discuss that another time. I mean, I record so many podcasts with people, then you find we're going off onto a different subject, and that could be a different subject for another day. I mean, I as a kind of someone who's interested in the kind of sociology and history of religion, you can look at that group of people that followed Jayatita in the early 80s and what happened to them. They all went down these different routes and corners, I mean, but that's a whole nother kind of issue. But in terms of resolving conflict in ISKCON, in terms of creating more of an inclusive environment. So I like that idea, that kind of trying to learn from our brothers and sisters and other mats, because still there is this, and I really don't like it at all, there is this baggage from ISKCON's past and history about not talking to the other mat. And it's so, I wouldn't say it's so old, it's not that old in the grand scheme of eternity, but it's just a lot of people have moved on. And for those devotees, so I was born in the, horrible, not a very Hare Krishna word, born, I appeared in the year 1984. So and my family are not Hare Krishnas, they're not interested in Krishna consciousness. I got involved with the movement in 2004, so 20 years after that. So I'm still relatively new. And so all that baggage from the past, I don't have that baggage from the past. So for me to learn later on that, you don't talk to those people, or you don't go to those temples. And I'm thinking, why? I'm from a kind of more liberal background. This is Britain. You can be any religion you want. You can do what you want within the law. It's kind of a relatively a liberal country. But you're telling me I can't talk to someone else that wears the same clothes as me, that wears the same tilak as me, that chants the same mantra as me, that follows the same diet as me, but I still can't talk to them. I just find it mind-blowing.
And it's official policy.
It is. It is, unfortunately, still.
It's like, see, we have ISKCON law, and by and large, ISKCON members are supposed to follow ISKCON law. But then, if you're living in a democratic country like ISKCON, like the UK or South Africa,
yeah,
there are civil laws to follow as well. And these civil laws and ISKCON laws don't quite gel together. And it's also an interesting interplay as well, because often when disputes arise, ISKCON members firstly think about ISKCON law, what should be done within those laws, what to do and what not to do. But at the same time, living in a country like South Africa, US, UK, civil laws allow for freedom of expression, to not be a racist, bigot, sexist, and all those sort of things. This potential clash between civil law and ISKCON law is another area of potential contention, you see.
And unfortunately, it's very cult-like, isn't it? Because groups like the Church of Scientology, the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe the Amish to some extent, they get a lot of stick and criticism because they're very kind of insular, it's closed doors. They deal with issues behind closed doors, and therefore the media rightly attacks them, the public attack them. And then when you find out that kind of ISKCON's kind of doing a similar thing, I find that quite upsetting and depressing. Whereas we want to be a modern movement, if we can be, a modern movement that attracts people in the 21st century. Yet we behave in such a way which is very insular and kind of secret.
Yeah, and how to come out of it.
Mm.
That's why I applaud the efforts of those devotees who do have, we could say, progressive outlooks. For example, there's ISKCON West. It's at one end of the spectrum, in ISKCON terms, that is, highly liberal, you could say, allowing, freedom of dress, how to practice, why not play a church organ instead of a harmonium, or, so it's not seen very favorably by, we could say, those who are more traditionally minded.
Mm.
See, here we're touching on unity and diversity. So you say you have 4 brothers, and in my experience in ISKCON Resolve, I've seen a whole array. By the way, we didn't just do cases in South Africa. I was involved in cases in the US, India, Pakistan, Canada, all over.
Wow.
And so I could see these cultural variations as well. But overall, this unity and diversity is something we haven't quite grasped, within ISKCON, to appreciate our diversity. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree in so many ways. Okay. I'm conscious that we've been chatting for about an hour on the podcast. It's been fantastic to chat to you and to find out more about the work of ISKCON Resolve. And it's great to have guests who have an open mind and can think for themselves. Actually, all my guests think for themselves. Yes. Can you hear me okay? You can hear me okay.
Yes, these are my earpieces. So I'm just, my hat slipped off a little bit, so I'm just making sure my earpiece stayed in.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, yeah. I was going to make a joke about one particular sannyasi and what they say. No, I won't do that. But when often I kind of joke with devotees, and often joking in the Hare Krishna movement, it's not always easy to do because some people don't get the jokes, they don't understand it, and everyone's so serious. And one joke I'll often tell to kind of break the ice if I meet new devotees is to say, well, when I got initiated, I made my commitments. I took the 4 vows, but then I took a 5th one too. And the 5th one was I would never lose my sense of humor, because some of them take it too seriously. And like some people laugh at that, and some people just like, what's he talking about? He took a 5th vow, never to lose his sense of humor. Is that serious? Deviation.
No, I like that. I like that. But how we present our humor, sometimes fairly often I write. I use a sense of, sarcasm and, deadpan humor, in my posts. And it's usually those who are, you could say, accustomed to sarcasm and so on, Western type humor, that they more understand. Whereas someone from India or English is their second language, they won't quite get it. So one has to be careful as well.
I had exactly that experience yesterday. I was at a program in Slough, which is just outside of London. And there was a mix of Western devotees and Indian devotees. And another joke I sometimes use is I say, "Oh, my name's Narada Das," which it is, my initiated name. And they say, "Oh, is that? I thought is it not Narada Muni Das? Are you not Muni?" I say, no, I left the Moonies years ago. And some people laugh at that, and some people don't have a clue what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We're kind of waffling here, but it's been really fascinating to talk to you and to have you as our 72nd guest on the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. It's been great. I've really appreciated your honesty and your sincerity. It's been great to hear about your journey, I guess, over the last 46 years in the Hare Krishna movement. Just think you joined before I was born.
Well, I joined in 1980.
1980.
So,
okay.
So I think more 43 years. But
43 years.
If you include the time when I received the Bhagavad Gita, I wasn't a full-time member then, but the link was made. So anyway, years, we talk about years, seniority, that's another big thing as well, isn't it? Among us, you're senior, now you're expected to talk in a certain way, behave in a certain way, have a certain type of, gravity, and know all the answers, and
yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers at home, and then you and I can have a very brief debrief after. So a big thank you to Kesava Krsna Prabhu for being our 72nd guest on the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. And it's very applicable this week because he is originally from Britain, from Gloucester, which is a beautiful part of the world. I haven't been to Gloucester for some years, even though we're both from the West Country, I guess you could say. Beautiful England. Reminds me of that hymn Jerusalem, which is another discussion for another day. But yeah, if you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, please do put a comment, and we welcome all comments. I mean, if you have something negative to say, please say it in a positive way. So you can be negative, but say it in a constructive way. What don't you like about it? If you're watching this on Facebook, please do like, love. You can like, love, or care for it. Hopefully you're not angry about the podcast. And please do share the link with your friends and your family, and with different pages and groups that you're part of. And if you do want to be a guest on the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast, please do get in touch. We are fast approaching our 75th episode, which is a massive milestone, and we'll be announcing something quite new about that when we get to it. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you all next week. Thank you. Hare Krishna.